Hi everyone, if you've known me before, you'd know that I am an advocate for the Canadian higher education system, and I've actually made a video about it before as to why people should consider applying to Canadian universities. But I've also noticed like a few questions going around as to how people could apply to these universities and how they could actually go through the application process. To be honest, I feel like the Canadian application process is relatively simpler and much less convoluted than the one in the US. But at the same time, I also agree that it could be very overwhelming for someone kind of starting out, because I felt overwhelmed with almost all unis that I applied to. I'm going to run you through a few things you should remember when you're applying to Canadian schools. The first thing you'd have to remember is that the application process changes very slightly from province to province and from university to university, obviously, and that there are two types of major applications that you might encounter when you're checking Canadian universities. The first type of application is called the common application, where you have a common application that contains a bunch of universities in respective province, right? And the other type of application is called the direct application that you use to kind of apply to a respective university. A very, very common case of a common application within Canada is the application to this province called Ontario. So just for context, Ontario is the province that hosts Toronto. If you're interested in applying to universities in Ontario, which I think a lot of students are, you could check out the OUAC form. And if you are an international student, or if you're not studying in Ontario, you'd have to take the 105 form within the OUAC website. I will attach the links in the description. And if you're a domestic student studying in Ontario, you'd have to choose the 101 application. So there are two types of applications within Ontario, and you'd have to select that. That's just one example of a common application. The second type of applications that I covered earlier was the direct application. So in that case, you'd have to go to the university website directly and go to their admission section. Like, for example, if you go to McGill and you go to the admission section, and if you log in and create an account and whatnot, you basically get access to their application. But even in Ontario, once you finish the OUAC form, the respective universities that you select within that form will get back to you and give you access to a direct portal within their respective university. So for example, I applied to the University of Toronto, and the University of Toronto, through the OUAC 105 application, back in the day it was called 105D. So I applied to that, and I indicated that I wanted to apply to a program within University of Toronto, and I indicated what the program was. And then the University of Toronto basically got back to me and said, there's a link over here, go to the portal and you fill in your details. The second thing I want to emphasize on is application deadlines. If you go to each university's application cycles and the deadlines, you'll see two different deadlines, right? Like, one is for your application, at least in most of the universities that I've seen. One is your application deadline, and the other is the document submission deadline. So this is like a great advantage when you're kind of like applying for Canadian universities, because like your general application deadline, if you're applying for fall, so the fall term, which is like the term that starts in September, would be somewhere around January 15th to February 1st-ish. General deadline is just like a placeholder thing where you say you're interested in this university, right? And the document deadline, which you'll have to cross-check with each university, right? Each deadline is kind of different per university. But if you come across this, you'd notice that universities have a different deadline for the document submission. So like things like your transcript or like your A-level certificate or whatever they need, you'd have a different deadline for that. So you have this gap where if you haven't got your results by then, you can actually apply to these universities and then submit your documents later. But something to keep in mind is that if you already have your documents, it's always better to apply as early as you can without waiting for the last moment, because most of these universities are also rolling admission. So what rolling admission means is that you'd be getting admitted throughout the year, right? So I applied to McGill relatively late, and I got my the offer around May. But there are some people who got it much earlier because they applied much earlier. But for example, in University of Toronto, I applied in the early admission deadline, and I got it in a couple of months, for example. So one thing to keep in mind is that these universities will be accepting people throughout the application cycle. So if you do have your documents early, make sure you apply. But even if you have it late, don't worry about it way too much, because I applied to universities late, and if you have a decent profile, you'd get in. But it's always good to kind of have your application stand out earlier in the process. The third thing on this list is the documents you need to apply to Canadian universities. So generally what's common for any applicant is the academic transcript from the respective high school they're applying through. So you just have to get like the last 4 years of marks that you've gotten in your high school. The other thing would be any standardized exam that you've done. So if you're in your first year of high school and you're applying to these respective schools, you'd have to send in like your predicted results and your transcript, and they'd basically give you a conditional offer, and you'd have to meet that offer when you are applying to this university. The second case would be where you'd have to take a gap year, and like say like you're done with your high school and you have all your results with you. You would basically submit your final results to these universities. Fourth thing to keep in mind is scholarships, right? Like there is a different application generally for merit scholarships in Canadian universities. You don't just qualify for these scholarships. What you qualify for generally when you apply to programs in Canada, it would be the entrance bursaries. So entrance bursaries most of the time come after you apply to a university, but when it comes to scholarships, they have like a completely different application generally. The deadlines generally come up before like the final deadline, and they generally consist of things like either essays or interviews or something like that, and each university has a variation of like what they ask for, but it's something to keep in mind. What they look for when it comes to scholarships is they look at your entire application, but they also see how you portray yourself as a unique student, and whether you portray yourself as someone who really wants to get into the respective. Almost always to kind of remember when you apply to Canadian schools is that you're not applying to the entire university, you're applying to a respective program, right? So when you're applying to a respective program, you need to know exactly what the program consists and whether you're interested in the stuff that's like being taught, and you need to see if like that's not what you're interested in, or whether that's whether you'll be interested in more things, so you can apply to multiple programs within the same university. Another subsection to that is that you'd have to think about how your program is structured across like 3 to 4 years of university, and whether the program you're applying to is a co-op program, and whether you'd have to mix in work and studies at the same time, or when you can take work terms off, or whether you can actually take work terms off even if your school is not a co-op school, just like how certain programs that McGill loves. So when you really read through the programs, and like when you really go through the respective program that you have to apply to, you get a bit more understanding. Also 2 intakes, so that'll be 1 in September and 1 in January, so feel free to apply to what you want. And I think if you have any other further specific questions with your case, you can definitely reach out to me, and we can have a look at that. The deadlines are coming up relatively soon for the fall semester, so do not hesitate or kind of wait any further when it comes to applying. I think you should definitely go ahead and apply, and I'll be here if you ever need anything. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoyed this video. And yeah, I'm always here.